Back to the next episode of MMA Retail Media Network podcast. MMA would like to enable marketers to know more about retail media network, what's driving the growth, what are the best practices, and how do you measure effectiveness of your investments on RMN. We are delighted to welcome Lex on this episode. Lex is the Chief Digital and Marketing Officer at L'Oréal SAPMENA Region. Lex, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Lex, I believe you are an early adopter of RMN and you're ahead of the curve. In your experience, what sets RMN apart from other digital media?
So thanks for saying that we're an early adopter. I don't know, we always like to try and be digital and advanced and innovative. I think retail media networks are exciting in the fact that they are bringing other signals to the media journey. You know, we've worked a long time with, I guess, more traditional digital platforms that bring interest-based targeting. What's really exciting about retail media is that it is real consumer purchase data that we can add to the mix. And these are additional signals on top of interests. That's the key difference.
So people have different interpretations of RMN. Lex, in your experience, what are the key characteristics of RMNs?
You're right. I think depending on who you are and what you do, you see retail media networks as different. We are predominantly a brand and a manufacturer, although we do operate our own retail businesses in certain places. So for me, retail media, it started off as e-commerce data and now growing into bricks and clicks, O+O retailer data. But there are definitely other intermediaries who have data that includes retail data, but wouldn't necessarily see them as retail media. And people who only operate their own stores, who only operate their own brands, will see retail media data as something very different. So you're right, depending on where you sit, what sort of data, what consumer experiences you have, and how you use it are different.
So how do you ensure that your RMN investments work seamlessly with other digital media or even other media for that matter?
It's true. We're in a world today where there are more and more walled gardens. And so the integration across the funnel, but also in terms of timing and strategization of different platforms is key. I think what's interesting is to say, okay, how do I strategize the role that retail media needs to play in a plan and in the funnel? So in a plan, it's about timing, it's about segmentation, it's about how we strategize which player at which time. But then across the funnel, I think there are two probably key things for retail media. One is more qualitative. It's about full funnel ideas. How do I take an idea that works right at the top of the funnel and really bring it down into retail media? Just because it's performance, just because it's lower funnel doesn't mean there can't be super great creative and brand ideas. And the second one is, how do we take retail media and take it both on platform and off platform? I think the availability of retail media and audience data across other platforms, things like custom audiences on Meta, are super, super powerful for us to say, okay, how do I mix interest-based signals and purchase signals together for more impact?
Yeah. So because RMNs enable targeting based on shopper behavior or my behavior on the site, it actually sometimes raises the question in the minds of people, like, average consumer. How do you balance between data privacy and consumer consent while creating both customer and value for yourself?
I think that I love this question around data privacy and retail media networks. I think I mentioned to you, I worked at Meta maybe 15 years ago when we started selling custom audiences, and I spent a lot of time talking to banks and telcos about data privacy. I think we're much further evolved than that now. These systems are private by design. We don't need to see the consumer data. It's about cohorts, it's about segments, it's about data hashing. So I think consumers should be relaxed, aware, understand how their data is being managed, and be comfortable with the fact that big players in retail media are not selling their data. They're working to create a better experience that's more relevant for them.
Yeah. So in your experience, how do you combine the precise targeting on retail media network, which is based on people's behavior, and a wider reach of other media? How do you work? How do you seamlessly do both together?
I think there are a lot of different elements to make a real seamless delivery on the plan. I think we've talked about a few. We've talked about thinking full funnel in terms of creativity, messaging, and experience, thinking full funnel in terms of how we use the data and pull it across. And then I think there's a question of saying, okay, what role does this retail platform or this retail media play in the consumer experience? If it's an individual retailer, how are they differentiating their experience for us in beauty? If it's a platform partner, what role do they play? So there's a combination of data, use case, and creative and messaging.
Yeah. So you mentioned about being used for full funnel, but generally, do you think most marketers are they looking at it pure performance media, or are they using effectively for full funnel marketing?
I think you're right. I think we're still very early on in the retail media space, and I think people see this initially as a performance media play. I think that the initial reaction to retail media is a performance media play on site to convert consumers. And I think this is the challenge, because I think we need to reframe a little bit. We're thinking about the value of the data. We're thinking about the value of the audiences, both for inclusion and exclusion, because there's a whole piece about exclusion as well. And then the retailers need to play their role as well. But how do I then take that data and that audience information and go up the funnel, sometimes off platform, to be able to drive that? So if we reframe retail media as audience data, audience signals, and capabilities rather than a specific format on site, suddenly we can have a completely different level of maturity in the whole RMN space.
Got it. So when you're measuring success for retail media network, what are the top 3 priorities for you? Is it ROAS? Is it new to brand? Is it incrementality? Or is it lifetime? What is it? What are your top 3?
Wow, I want to say all of them, but top three is difficult. I don't know in what order. It's true that if we think about your last question, how do people see retail media and they see it as performance? I think we need to dump ROAS. ROAS is not the answer. It doesn't tell us what we want to know. Yeah. It's short term. It's narrow. I think the other things you talked about. So you talked about 3 things: ROI, incrementality, and new to brand. Incrementality and new to brand, super, super important. For businesses like ours, we have 37, 39 beauty brands across the category. What we're always saying is, okay, how can this data help me find the new consumers that are not buying my brand today? Yeah. What I don't want to do is go and pay acquisition costs again and again and again across different platforms to acquire the same consumer. So that kind of rolls itself into, okay, incrementality and new consumers, and then lifetime value so that I can push people further down for consumption. But I think it's really important, because just as you asked me a moment ago, how do people see retail media? What's the level of maturity and understanding? It's the same problem we've got on ROAS. ROAS is a very narrow-minded short-term metric and definitely not the place to focus on.
Yeah, great. So RMNs allow you to put people into smaller clusters. And there is a huge opportunity for every brand to prepare personalized creative at scale. How effectively do you think the industry is doing it?
I think so this question of personalization, hyper-personalization at scale is a really interesting one. And I think there's a balance, and we have to find that balance. People don't want to be told, in our category, oh, look at your spots, I've got the right solution for you. Because it's a little bit scary when I'm scrolling on my phone and somebody says I've got acne. So there is an extreme of hyper-personalization that definitely is to be avoided. It's not privacy safe, it's not nice, it's not a good experience. But you're right, there is a notion of where we are in data tech and AI, where we can start to think about cohorts and we can be more dynamic. And that's possible. That maybe wasn't possible 5+ years ago. So that's what's exciting. And that's where working with the retailer on audience segments, on cohorts, is super, super interesting. How many people have bought skincare? How many people have bought skincare on my brands? Are they interested in acne or in cleansing or in moisturizing? Are they cross buyers of beauty between skincare and makeup? These things are really interesting, and it's data mining with the retailer to tease out those cohorts, to create these segments, and then make them available on-site and off-site to target.
If you have your own first-party database, what value will RMNs bring to it?
So we have first-party data. We have a bunch of first-party data across a lot of our brands. Some of our brands operate direct-to-consumer and others. But also we have a few brands in our consumer division that operate at scale, mostly through grocery and retailers. Yeah. We don't have the consumer information on that because it's in a multi-brand environment where we understand. And then there's a notion of competition, which is never going to appear in our first-party data. Yeah. If I go to a grocery partner who has a big beauty, health and beauty, personal care category, that retailer is able to tell me how many consumers are in the category or not in the category, buying with them, buying with competition, what sort of price points. So there is much, much more value in the data when you look at a category, when you can look at consumers, and we can look at brands and competitors. So yes, our first-party data is great, but this adds a whole nother layer of excitement to it, and all in a privacy-safe way.
Yeah, great. How do you manage multiple RMNs?
Multiple retail media networks, I think, is one of the. So I used to be in the UK 4 or 5 years ago, and this is definitely a challenge. I think, and it's a worry for me because at the moment where we are, every single retail media player wants to be a walled garden. And we know in the media space, we've already got quite a few walled gardens, Meta, Google, TikTok. So adding another one creates a level of complexity. We can't manage reach and frequency across different places without a lot of modeling. So this is a challenge. So I think first of all, in the current state, is to understand where you prioritize and where you don't prioritize. It's impossible to spend with every retailer in a space because similar consumers, similar buying opportunities. So I think there's really a piece about what's the partnership like between us as a manufacturer, us as a brand, and the retailer to bring a qualitative element to it. And that's probably about the data mining and the audiences. And then there's a phasing and timing piece, which is, as long as I don't activate all the retailers at the same time, then hopefully I balance out my activations.
Yeah. Great, thank you. How accurate and reliable is RMN targeting? And how does it significantly differ from other digital? Because some of the signals are intent-based. And therefore, their claim is that, look, our targeting and accuracy is good. May not be equally good, but what's your view on that?
I think you said it. I think this is the core differentiator of retail media networks, of retail media data. This is hard purchase data connected to an ID. We've come through a world in media where we started with kind of demographics and interest-based groups. Then we moved into a world of the social graph with Meta, where we're really connecting to individuals, but still very interest-based and demographic. Now we're moving to a point where we have real sales data connected in the majority to good profiles because people are paying, they're connected. So there's validity. So I think there's a lot of trust in the data and the scale of the data. And what gets exciting is not just how you use it on your own, but how you connect these different things together.
So we've talked a lot about your perspective from a brand. What are your expectations from RMNs, and how do you build a strong, long-term sustainable partnership?
I think that's a very interesting question, and you touched on it at the end. You touched on this word partnership. I think in the last few years, a lot of platforms and players have seen retail media as just a big profit opportunity, big opportunity to sell a homepage multiple times, to add an extra line to the P&L for profitability. And I don't think that's the answer. I think it's a partnership for growth. And so as a manufacturer, as a brand, what we need from the retail media networks, from the retail players, is this partnership to look into the data and find the growth opportunities together. It's really about working together to drive business growth rather than making money through media. And I think that's a short-term versus a medium-term point of view. Because if we can find the right segments, the right cohorts, make them available both on-site and off-site, and I know there's an obsession with on-site because the profitability is super exciting, but I think we need to take retail media data off-site as well to be able to deliver full funnel. I think that's how we find a partnership for real growth.
When we talk about tech partnerships, and of course AI, how do you think AI will shape the RMN capabilities, and what role tech partners play in enabling RMNs?
Yeah, no conversation today would be right without talking about AI. The way we look at it is we look at the value chain of anything we're doing and say, okay, how does AI or Gen AI or machine learning play a role along that journey? Because there are lots of different opportunities. We talked a little bit about personalization. Personalization is a real Gen AI opportunity. How do I deliver dynamic creative at scale? We've talked about dynamic creative for a long time, but I think now it's really coming to life. I think there's a piece in audience segmentation and data mining and audience management where AI is super interesting. Because a query that says, look at different combinations of audiences, inclusion, exclusion, and cross categories, and find where there's scale for me. That's always the interesting piece of data mining, is it's not just the use case, but it's where is there a use case with scale, and where is there a use case that's interesting for inclusion or exclusion. And then I think the last piece, and this is where all of the big platforms are working, is the role of AI in optimizing media. And making sure that we don't optimize for ROAS, but we think longer term across the journey. So lots of spaces for AI to work across. And probably even further, we talked a little bit about privacy, clean rooms and other platforms where we can start to do things that bridge all these walled gardens, different retail media networks, other media players. There's a new emerging opportunity there for AI as well.
So retail media networks typically get funding from both sales and marketing. And is there an opportunity for anybody to integrate that media investments?
This is probably one of the early challenges of retail media. Where do we fund retail media from? Is it upper funnel? Is it lower funnel? Is it commercial or trade budgets? And I think this is, again, one of the challenges of our world overall that is becoming more cross-functional. We try to really have a full funnel planning approach that bridges brand marketing at the top of the funnel all the way through to activation, performance, and trade. Particularly when we work with some of the big retail media players who tend to be more e-commerce centric, because that's where the data is, but it's moving into Bricks customers because Bricks customers with loyalty programs have big data sets. And so pulling it all together and understanding how each of these parts play and connecting the dots and the people inside our organization is really, really key. I don't think it's a question of where this money comes from, but about how we spend to deliver the most effectiveness, the most impact at a broader scale across the consumer journey.
Lex, you manage a large region. When you have so many markets which are so diverse, and when you see development of the region, how do you compare that with, say, North America or Europe?
So it's true our region is very broad. We have 13 time zones between Morocco and New Zealand, so there's always someone in pajamas or someone with a cocktail at the end of the day. I think in the region we're actually seeing a lot of what we've seen at a broader scale across the world. I'm not necessarily an expert in every region, but I think in North America, loyalty card data from grocery was very widely available. It was bought by media platforms. So they were able to integrate that much earlier on. So they already have been on this journey of integrating sales data and interest-based data together. In Europe, that wasn't so widely available, but you had a lot of big players who had loyalty programs, physical players who had loyalty programs, and O+O was quite strong. So you started to see that, and you saw, in my time in the UK, I saw grocery, chemist, pharmacy, bringing quite big retail media walled gardens and building bridges. I think what's interesting in Asia is we've got a lot more different types of players. We've got, yes, the traditional loyalty programs through Bricks, but we've got a very dynamic e-commerce market. And so that's creating a whole nother set of data. And so I think what we've got, even if everybody's going in the same direction, is we've got a bunch of different models that are maturing, whether they come from online or offline, or even O+O, loyalty versus just account data. So everybody's moving in the same direction globally around retail media networks, but how we get there and the steps looks different in different places.
Quick commerce is doing so well in India. What do you think other markets can learn from India and build on that success?
So quick commerce is a really interesting space. It's true, we're seeing India, particularly Mumbai, really dynamic. Dubai as well, actually. It was more challenging, actually, in Europe, quick commerce, because the cost model is hard. But in our region, we really see it moving. I think from a retail media point of view, the quick commerce players will obviously have similar experiences to other retail players. They'll build their own data sets. But basket size is probably smaller. This is more impulse purchase. So the breadth of their data won't be as rich. So I think there's a piece, almost two sides to this. One, quick commerce players will have their own data sets and they'll be able to clearly understand the consumers in a certain level of detail. But I think also they will be another walled garden, and we'll get to this challenge of how do I understand consumers across different retail media networks and what technology can I use to start to look at the aggregate experiences.
Any other thoughts?
I think the retail media space is one that is undefined and vague and still young in terms of where we are today. I think it is understood, if I can say that. I think to your point, very focused on lower funnel, very focused on performance, too much of an obsession with ROAS. I think there are two or three things we need to do. I think one is thinking about how retail media is actually data and audience segments to be leveraged more broadly, thinking about how we use them as inclusion and exclusion, because that's super, super valuable, and then how we use them across the funnel by passing the data to other platforms in a privacy-safe way, and across the funnel by making ideas come to life all the way through to purchase. But it's a super exciting space to be.
Wonderful speaking to you, Lex. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all the insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Super pleasure to be here. Really exciting topic that's going to grow in the future.